said now, and then I pressed the wrong button. So, we've got somebody joining who's taking a little while to join in. So I'm Nathan Hill. I'm one of the founders of Honest Grapes. I'm accompanied by, in fact, on my screen, though, on my left and my right, the incomparable Luke Gavin. Yes, he is a real person when you get your emails from us. Luke, if you can wave at everybody. And Angus Raffles, there we go. Got a glass in his hand already. Well done. And so Angus and Luke are the people who look after our Premier Cru Wine Club, and they're alongside me today. As I said, there should be about 30, 35 or whatever people. We had quite a lot of requests last time. We're pleased there was a video. So today we're going to be talking about sustainability. The first session was all about white wines, and we introduced a couple, 3 lovely white wines. We then went on to the reds last week. Next week, we're going to be talking about some big reds from the New World, because I've been mostly really focused on Old World wines at the moment. So we'll get a real bundle of fun with some famous grapes and lovely wines from New World next week. But today, I guess you could almost say it's the most geeky academic session, because we're going to be talking a lot about sustainability. So before I get my geek on, I think it's much more valuable, given that it is 6:30 in the evening. The sun has firmly set over the yard arm. It is pouring with rain up here in the hills of Hampstead, although behind me, of course, is the Mosel Valley. A sustainable winemaker we'll be talking about. But I think it's ever so sensible to get our first glass of wine in our hands and a little sort of sip down our gullets to loosen us up. Otherwise,
continue the theme of pouring, yes. I like
exactly.
That.
Otherwise, you've just got to listen to me talking about sustainability, which is much less fun than drinking a bit of wine. So actually, I'm going to do this evening in a slightly different order. I'm going to introduce the first wine and then talk about sustainability. The tasting order for this evening, Luke and Angus, please note, so you can pop them in the chat box. We're going to start with the white wine, which is the Terre, the Cantina Volpi Grillo Siciliane. So that's the white, which hopefully you've got chilled, and I see some glasses there, brilliant. Then, and I'm not sure if this was the order on the list you had, we're going to do the Elephas, the one with the red elephant on the front of it, or red buffalo, isn't it, or bison or something?
Yeah, I've got a bit of a story about that. When we come to it, I'll tell you why.
And then we'll have the Spanish wine at the end, the Estancia del Silencio, the Lonely Man, the Monastrell at the end there. Okay, so actually, I can see we've got John trying to join multiple times on multiple devices. Hopefully he'll get in. So let me introduce this first wine first. So here we are. We'll do our see it, sniff it, slurp it, savor it. For any of you who missed sessions 1 and 2, the wines are still available on the website, or Luke or Angus will help you to access them. And the videos are up on YouTube. And if you love me that much that you're prepared to watch 2 hours of me waffling on, then you're welcome to. In fact, if you did attend sessions 1 and 2, and I can see several of you did, you can watch me all over again and share the love. There you are. So let's do our see it and sniff it on this lovely Grillo. So very pale straw, very slightly greenish tinge, slightly herbal whiff to it with a good whiff of citrus there. I was going to say quite plain, but what it's giving me is quite a lot of sort of apple and lemon, really, but a nice sort of twist of thyme at the end there. Now, the thing you've all been waiting for, 6:37 in the evening, we are going to drink some wine. Japanese noodle time, good old slurp.
Oh, I think a nice slurping, yeah, it's good.
That is crisp. That is a crisp, clean wine, but it's got a nice texture to it, and I'll talk quite a lot about texture in terms of organic wines in particular this evening. Grillo grape, probably never heard of it. It's actually a fairly recent grape, been around for a couple of centuries, and it's specific to Sicily. You do see it elsewhere, but if any of you are as old and wizened as me, and remember your nice sweet Marsala wine from the 1970s or 1980s, Grillo was the grape. I can look, Angus is laughing there. Angus wasn't even a fetus in the 70s and 80s, but there you are. So if you have your sweet old Marsala wine that you might make your different desserts from, zabaglione and things like that, you'd make with an egg masala, or perhaps tiramisu or things like that. All of those things with a little bit of sweet red wine, that would have been your masala wine. But actually, as that went out of fashion, in came Grillo as because it is actually a white grape, as you can make a lovely, clean, fresh wine like this on that amazing island of Sicily. I can hear you all going da, 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 da. Okay, but it's not time for the Godfather right now. It's quite textured. It's quite crisp and clean. It's a good start, and I've chosen it to begin with as an organic wine because it's got so much texture to it, and that clean nose goes straight into a bit of texture. I'm going to get let's get the screen share, and then let Luke, if I can do this for you, Luke.
Many people been to Sicily? Anyone? Anyone in the group? Yeah. Oh, Angus has got. There's a few hands in the air there. Yeah, just before I can't see. So yeah, anyone who's not been, you must go. It's fantastic. It's a fascinating place, and tons of reasons to go. Not least the wine and the food is fantastic. The scenery and everything. There's so much going on there. It's kind of like the old Italy, and it still feels very much what you'd expect from something traditionally Italian, culture-wise, and relatively untouched, I think, by tourism and other things like that. So we are over on the map here to the far west, and the region's called Trapani, which isn't actually on there. It's around the town of Marsala, like Nathan said. It's that area there is where this vineyard in the photograph is. So this is the Cantina Volpi vineyards, and as you can see, not too far inland, a few hundred meters or a couple of kilometers actually, probably in total, and not massively high up, not loads of altitude. But the good thing about the Grillo grapes, they can handle the heat and they can handle the sun, which there's plenty of down in this part of the world. What you can't see on the map here is actually we're just about level with Tunis, so North Africa, and it's closer to the coast of North Africa than it is to mainland Italy, which is kind of an interesting fact, just to give you an idea of how warm and dry it is as well. But the Grillo grapes can handle it, and they've been making wine there, as Nathan said, in the Marsala style for a long time. But the dry Grillos are kind of a relatively new offshoot of the fortunes of fortified wine is generally dipping down a bit, as you probably all know, with sherry kind of had its heyday in the 70s and 80s, and same with port as well, but it never really got to the international heights of acclaim as those two did. But these days, making some really, really good dry Grillos, such as this one. And it's the second most grown white grape in Sicily. The most being Catarrato. It's a bit more of a workhorse sort of grape. There's some pleasant wines from it, but it's a little bit more simple, a little bit less on the acid, and just a bit less refreshing, but perfectly fine. But the second most grown white grape in Sicily.
Thank you, Luke. So any comments from the assembled Avengers? What do you think of this one? Anybody want to give their verdict on it? You can unmute yourselves.
Yeah, jump in, please. Hopefully it's refreshing.
Yeah, I'd say I haven't got it with me tonight, but I've tried it before many times in the summer. I remember being, nice, good level of acidity there, some nice, definitely some citrusy fruit I remember as well. Lemon, grapefruits, that kind of ether. So is anyone getting those kind of citrus aromas coming through? Thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
So, something zesty.
Robert, do you want to comment? Come on, we need some interactivity here.
I've been actually dissuaded from my family from commenting on anything. They're trying to muzzle me here. Sort of like I started at about 4:30. no.
Excellent. No, this is the time to speak. Yeah, this is good.
Yeah, exactly. And so sort of but no, it's got depth. It's sort of it's surprising for a screw top. But then again, I'm probably just a cork snob. But it's an enjoyable early evening drink with a good degree of depth behind all the citrus and the lightness and a degree of effervescence.
Excellent. Great comments. Yeah, I mean that's a perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. That's wonderful. And actually, I have to say, isn't the label ugly? Running an online wine business, one of the really annoying things, and you will hear this from me a little bit this evening, maybe a bit of a moan, that alongside sustainability and people who are very sort of focused on their winemaking, quite often comes a lack of interest in actually making it look good when you put the picture on the website. They actually do two types of label. This is the ugly version, and the other version is the uglier version.
I remember Nathan, when we sent the samples, they sent us the old labels, which were nicer labels. And then when we got the wine over, and they had these those green labels on, which we weren't.
Yeah, and it really is, and we keep telling them your wine is much better than it shows on the label on the bottle. And the reason we continue to support them is that they're lovely people. It's a fourth generation cantina, and it was founded a century ago in 1914. They actually make wines from all over Italy. They do a wonderful Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, a lovely Nero d'Avola, this Terre Siciliane Grillo. I'm trying to remember, they do an Insulia as well.
That's right, yeah, from Sicily.
And it's a lovely range, and they're pretty good value. I mean, they're generally, I think they're between sort of 11.90 and 13.90, that sort of price range.
Right.
And for, you can see on the back of the label that it's 12.5% alcohol. That's a good sign. It's a hot place, Sicily. They haven't allowed it to run to high alcohol. You can see it's labeled now. It's hard for me to show you this, but if you've got the bottle, you'll see it's certified as bio and vegan. Bio being Italian for organic, and it's actually certified organic. So it's certified. It's got a certification number there. So this is a fully fledged, qualified organic wine. I think of a very high quality, given the price that we charge for it. I would say that, but never mind the width, feel the quality. And I just think it's stunning. And yeah, exactly, label looks as though it's for disinfectant. Well, hardly for me to say that, but the wine really is better than the label, and that's why we continue to list it, even though we keep begging them to have a bit more prettier label, something that sort of reflects the standard and quality.
It's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of the Romatorios that we had, the Chianti last week, who kind of overperformed on anyone's label.
Yeah, see, Romatorio we had last week, those beautiful pieces of art as the labels, and that really sells the wine. It's also, frankly, in days outside the current ones, I'm often going around to people, for dinner, and people want me to try and take people some wine or whatever. You want to take people a bottle that's a bottle of beauty. Robert, as for screw tops, I'm actually the other way around. You'll all know I'm a physicist by training. I think there's been so much advance in making great wines in screw cap, also technical advances in allowing oxygenation to happen through the screw cap, so wine can even age under screw cap. I think it's generally far more reliable than cork. So there you are. Iona's saying,
I like corks, just saying as well, but
yeah, I like corks as well, but you'll see, and often, in some countries, New Zealand is 99% screw cap. Even in top estates in Bordeaux, very high level estates are doing experiments with screw cap. So it's mainly consumer resistance to saying, I think one should taste better if it's with a cork seal. The Germans, by the way, and Austrians do some amazing vinologues and other things using glass beads. Iona's asking, is this made by Botta? it's team cork. It's refreshing, but I was hoping for more herbal notes. Would you rather this slightly warmer to open up a little? Yes, Ian, I'm not sure if you've taken it straight from the fridge, it'll be too cold. So do allow it to warm up. Keep it below room temperature, but allowing it to warm up a bit, you should get those herbal notes rather more. Lee and Claire are asking, how does the heat in Sicily affect the taste? That's quite complicated, but in general, Ireland and southern latitudes, hot places like Sicily, means that the grapes mature fully, they ripen fully faster, more hotter climate. It also, though, flattens out acidity. And so the nice thing about this Grillo is it's got a decent bit of acidity in there. It's just like, imagine you've got unripe grapes. They're going to be tart and acidic, any fruit, okay? Tart and acidic, going to nicely ripe, going to over plump and sort of fizzy and overcooked. In this case, this Grillo, they've picked it probably a little bit early. And if I remember correctly, the vineyards that they harvest from are actually quite flat, and have got a nice bit of wind coming across them.
Yeah, that helps. The situation being on the island, it's often pretty breezy there, which helps. Keeps the temperature down a little bit, but they also very carefully manage the canopy, so the leaves on the vines grow over the top of the fruit so that it doesn't get sunburn, which can happen, particularly with white grapes in hot climates like that. But it's careful selection, the variety to start with, and then the picking time, essentially, like Nathan said, to not let the alcohol go too high, and let it kind of cook on the vine, and also the sunburn in situation. So some white grapes just wouldn't be suitable at all to grow on Sicily. But Grillo has historically been there for a long time and performed well, and it still needs some careful management. But yeah, it's definitely suitable in terms of the sunlight and the heat. Just quick word, one more word on the producer. So Terre is their kind of range, their organic range. All of their sites are organic, by the way, that Nathan mentioned. So Piemonte, Puglia, Abruzzo, and in Sicily. And Terre is the Greek goddess of nature, which I think gives you a little bit of an insight into the choice of the label. They still didn't have to do it exactly like that, but that's the story behind the name. The Greek goddess of nature is behind the wine.
Thank you, Luke. So I'm now going to sort of introduce you to some of the basics about sustainability. This is from my perspective. By all means, move on to the second one, the Elephas, if you'd like, while I'm speaking. But I thought it would be useful to cover some of the basics and the buzzwords. And I please, interrupt and argue with me, but I'll sort of get started and then open it up for discussion, because it's quite a sort of emotive topic, sustainability. So those of you who know me will know that actually I'm a technology investor, and I'm mainly investing in what's called clean technology or impact investment. So investments that are sustainable and promote sustainability in our economy. But sustainability is often seen by people either as a sort of, one's image is the sort of, to put it as a cliche, the sort of sandal wearing cardigan hippies, or they see it as being something that is all about the way you eat, things like veganism or whatever, and people will have a strong emotive reaction either for that or against it. For me, though, sustainability is actually good business sense. I'm a business person at heart, as well as loving my wine. Honest Grapes has won the Green Retailer Awards from the drinks business 3 years in a row, winner in 2018, runner-up to Marks and Spencer's in 2019, and we beat Marks and Spencer's again to be winner in 2020, in December 20. Yeah. We also runner-up to Marks and Spencer's from the Decanter Awards, again as Green Champion. So as a wine club, I take environment seriously. And for Tom Harrow, my illustrious business partner, and myself, and for Charlie, Luke, Angus, the rest of the team, we do take sustainability seriously. But sustainability isn't just about the environment. Just being green doesn't give you a business. If being green goes against good business principles, you'll have a failing business that then isn't sustainable economically. If being green isn't good for people, you don't have a people sustainable business. So for me, I look at all three parts of sustainability when I'm looking at a business. And in Honest Grapes, I'm looking to have wonderful winemakers, the people, a wonderful team, the team in Honest Grapes, a wonderful club, you and our club members. I'm looking to have a sustainable business where I, almost like using the words fair trade, although that's trademarked, we want to pay our winemakers. We're not just bargaining with them to get the cheapest deal for the wine. They need to be able to sustain their businesses. So economic sustainability, we need to be able to sustain our business. Quite often people will say, your wine is 20p more or 50p more than somebody else's. Well, you have a living to make, we have a living to make. I have other businesses as well, where I need to make sure that they're there to preserve people's jobs, they're sustainable into the future, and that we pay our suppliers, our growers, a fair whack for their wine, and that we make a living so that we can be sustainable. And then environmental sustainability, for me, comes, we actually did, in order to win these awards, we took the result of quite academic studies, and there are academic studies all about the impact of wine and winemaking on the environment. Now, let's be clear, in principle, moving wine around the world is not the lowest impact that you could have for having a drink in the evening. So if we're going to have that lovely drink that we're quaffing this evening, we need to make sure as a wine club and as a wine retailer that we have the lowest possible impact on the environment. And it's really important to me that we start with a set of principles. And we boiled this all down. We took academic studies. I actually worked with a friend of mine who's still a club member of Honest Grapes, is our Grand Cru Classé club, who is himself an impact investor. And we boiled this down to saying there were three things we needed to do if we wanted to be a leader in environmental sustainability in the UK wine business. And that was three things. The first thing is sustainable winemaking. And I'll cover that in some detail, but essentially there's two parts to winemaking. There's what happens in the vineyard, which we call viticulture. There's what happens in the winery, which we call enology. We audit all of our winemakers before we bring them into our process of selection. So I think over 90, or everyone has been audited now, and over 90% fall within a sustainability level. We're not didactic about it. We allow a few wines just because they're good. And ultimately, Tom and I are after good wine, not bad wine. So we won't sacrifice our principles of getting something with a buzzword on it just because it's sustainable. But almost all of our wines qualify for the title of sustainable. The second part, so making friends with understanding sustainability in wineries, really important. The second part then is low impact transport. Wine is heavy, it's heavy to move around. By consolidating our wine shipments and bringing them across in small bulk, we reduce the carbon miles that are involved in moving wine from our producers to us. Now, you'll know that we have our sommelier selection. Those wines are available straight from Clapham. In fact, nowadays, almost all of our wines from Clapham directly move into Clapham from our winemakers, certainly the European winemakers, Italy, Spain, France, Germany. Almost all of those come directly from the winemaker, because rather than moving them into another warehouse and then into Clapham, it's amazing how many movements there are of wine. Just by cutting out the movements of the import process, you reduce the carbon footprint of that wine. Believe it or not, moving 600 bottles on a pallet from New Zealand to Clapham only costs a few more carbon miles than moving wine from Sussex, English sparkling wine. Moving wine in bulk is relatively low impact. It's what's called the last few miles problem of delivering wine to people that's the real issue. But you'll know that we have our sommelier selection, where the wines are available immediately, but also our club offers on the website. And the club offers work the other way. It's like what's called a flash sale or vente privée or something like that. where you place your order up front, and then we send our van to go and pick up the wine and bring it in. And that way you get the benefit of getting access to the wine at the best price, but you wait a bit until we've collected all the orders together and bring them in. And that's why sometimes people say, where's my wine? It's because we've been waiting to get it across. It's less environmentally impactful to bring wine over by the vanful than a few bottles at a time. The third part of sustainability then is promoting sustainability within the wine club, and things like buying full cases of wine. Of course, I'd tell you to buy full cases rather than a bottle, but actually buying wine in 6s and 12s, even 18s and 24s, the last mile carbon impact of that delivery to you at home is lower if you buy wine in full cases or mixed cases. Going back to the sustainable winemaking, what do I look for when we're auditing? We actually have an audit sheet, and the producers need to fill that in with support from Clémence, who does our merchandising. She buys our wine under Tom's and my direction. We look at the vineyard, we look at biodiversity. It's a very good indication of sustainable winemaking that you see biodiversity. We look for what I call old vines and young winemakers. We look for the sort of culture where the vineyard has been handed through the generations, and where the attitude of the winemakers is to be stewards of their vines and their vineyards to hand on to the next generation. That's more important for us than just a stamp that says we're organic or whatever. We also look for low use of water, because use of water is one of the most precious resources in the world. And there's been some amazing advances nowadays in reducing irrigation, reducing water use. And that then moves on to the second part. I've moved from the vineyard to the winery. The design of the winery tells you an awful lot. Gravity-fed wineries, modern-built wineries, where the wine goes from the top through to the bottom. So from the vineyard to the press, to the vats, to the ferments, to the storage. I know that sounds trivial, but the vats and stuff are very heavy. And if you're pumping wine and carting it around, not only are you processing and potentially damaging the wine, but you're also using energy and water. We look for low use of water in the winery. We look for the minimum use of chemicals, and that's really important. We also look for things like low weight bottles and things. And I know there was a question in the last session about sort of big heavy bottles, and British consumers love a big Malbec or a big Bordeaux in a big heavy bottle. But actually about 70% of the carbon miles of transporting wine are in the weight of the bottles rather than in the wine itself, because the bottle's heavier than the wine. So that's a little bit about the basics. Moving on to some of the buzzwords, I'll leave them up there, but I'll come off the share so I can see everybody, see if I remember them all. I'll talk a little bit about, actually, no, let's get the second wine in us, and I'll talk a little bit about these other things, because I'm thirsty again. Let's just open this Elephas Rosso, and then I can talk a bit about buzzwords. Please feel free to interrupt and ask questions, post things in the chat. I'll just briefly introduce the Elephas if you haven't had it. It's our first red wine of the evening. It's organic. It's from Castello di Torre in Pietra, which is in Lazio. Any football supporters, of which I'm not one, will know Lazio being the area, Lazio, Emilia-Romagna, the winemaking region closest to Rome. Luke, do you want to say something about this? I'll briefly go back to the share so that I can show the map.
Yeah, always nice to have the map for some context. But as Nathan said, around the city, or closest to the city of Rome. So we've got the medieval village of Torre in Pietra, hence the name of the Castello. So here we've got, I don't always include a picture of the chateau or the estate of any kind, but here it's quite an impressive Castello in this part of Italy. So writing's tiny on this map. It was really difficult to find one that was any better. but Terre is this orange region by the coast, and we're kind of halfway between Rome and there. So we're within the orange region.
Yeah, here's Rome, and here's the area we're talking
about. There we are. Hopefully you can see it. So there's a bit of context. As I said, not expected anyone to be able to read too much there, but it's surrounded with Umbria and Tuscany up to the north of that region, and then Abruzzo and Campania down to the south, to the east and the south. And yeah, and not particularly well known, Lazio, compared to a lot of the other regions in Italy, or this part of Italy anyway. And only a few of the wines really make it out of the country, but there's some really interesting stuff there. I'll very quickly say something about the estate, that the Castello has been there since the 16th century. And there's lots and lots of extinct volcanoes in that part of Italy. A few famous ones, some of them still active or partially active anyway. And onto the label very quickly. We'll get that out there because it's quite an unusual picture to see on an Italian bottle of wine. But there's some soft, tough rock, which is what they dug the original wine cellar in the 16th century when they were making the castle. And when they were digging the wine cellar, they found these cave paintings with some prehistoric elephant, mammoth-like creatures depicted on the walls. So they're kind of a nod to that. So it's not necessarily the sort of history you'd expect coming from that part of the world, from near Rome, but we're going back to maybe more like prehistory. And yeah, it's a nod to those cave paintings. So animals that look like that or very similar to that were roaming around that part of Italy. God knows how long ago, but just when early man was doing the cave paintings at that particular time. So there's history other than wine and food. Who knew?
So the wine itself, made fermented in stainless steel, fermentation in cement. So this old-fashioned winemaking. It's a very, as Luke said, it's a very old vineyard, a very old place. The cellars carved into the limestone tuffre, and the grapes in here, Sangiovese, which we had in the wine last week, but also Montepulciano, which is seen in Abruzzo, and Merlot. And I think the taste of this is a very interesting wine, actually. It's one of those wines, it's obviously a food wine here, but it's one that's got some really, again, texture. Texture is everything in this wine. You've got some good ruby color, slightly purpley, so showing quite young, quite vinous and fruity, sour cherries, red berries, some nice, but quite, there's quite a lot of very fine tannin there. So it's going to be a lot better. Like with meat, I think this is a good like cold cut and antipasti type wine, very good with those sorts of foods. And what's really nice about it, I've loved this bit in the savor bit. Remember my see it, sniff it, slurp it, savor it. The savor it thing here is really nice because it's got a really nice finish to it, a nice grip. I think it goes very, very nicely with those sort of antipasti of cold cuts, salamis,
something like that, yeah.
Artichokes, olives, all of those sorts of things.
Cheese as well.
Yeah.
One more thing to add to the tasting there. There's I think we said last week that sour cherry thing is almost unavoidable with most Italian reds, but there's also a little bit of balsamic on there as well, which is another thing that particularly makes a lot of Italian reds stand out. It's very, very characteristic, and this one does that, I think, really nicely.
Yeah, and by the way, if you've got any left over at the end of the evening, try it with something like Parmesan, a hard cheese. It actually goes really nicely with a hard cheese. Thank you, Joe. Impressed with our sustainability credentials, closely follows national policy framework. Yes, I mean, it is aligned, with my investment principles. And as I said, I've worked closely with co-investors who I invest in impact investments with. It's difficult, as a very small wine business, we're just a small wine club, to beat people like Marks and Spencer's. Notice, by the way, none of the other sort of mainstream wine merchants are on that list. So it's all about for me, it's about having simple principles, which are the principles I explained to you. And then I hope Luke and Angus would agree, making sure that 14 people in a small company all understand that those are the principles we're trying to follow. and over the course of 3 years, for example, we got all of the plastics out of our delivery chain from the warehouse to you. So there's now should be zero, or if try and avoid any, but I think we're down to zero plastics in our delivery.
That's the thing. I think one thing I'll just throw in there is it's quite easy to kind of agree that sustainability is good and all of those things obviously make sense. And then it's when you get down to the nitty-gritty of making it happen and the logistics of that. It took us surprisingly long time to get some plastic-free tape that was actually effective. But it's stuff like that where you just go from 98% to pretty much 100% free is a bit more difficult to sign up officially to those kind of credentials.
Yeah, so it's most important to me that the team in Honest Grapes understands why we're doing it, sees that those are the 3 things we're trying to do, and then every few months tries to improve each of them so that we get better all the time. We just learn more. Let me talk briefly about organic and biodynamic wine. So I'm going to talk about some of those buzzwords now. Organic wine, like organic food, a lot of the word organic can either mean that something is certified as being organic, so it's been through an official certification. But where does that originate from? Think about it. It's about what you don't put into the wine. It's what you omit to put in, avoid putting in, not putting things that are not permitted in the vineyard, and not adding additives or chemicals that are not permitted within the winery. And that's what we mean by organic wine. Now, actually, you can get into conflicts here between organic credentials and green credentials, because a lot of winemakers will say, I don't follow organic production. And then they'll give you reasons for that. And at first you think they're making excuses. And then you listen to them and you say, yes, I get what you're saying. So let's go through it in a bit of detail. Organic production is about not adding things to wine. But why do people spray their grapes? Why do people put chemicals or additives or treatments in the winery? They're not doing it to spoil or make the wine horrible. They're doing it to preserve it and make it really good when it reaches you from Honest Grapes or elsewhere. They're not deliberately adulterating it. But mass agricultural production of the 20th century favored productivity over quality and provenance, and over the sort of values that we want now in sustainability in wine. So there's a conflict here, and a good example of that would be sulfates and sulfate sprays. You're not allowed to put pesticides and things like that on grapes in the vineyard if you are certified organic. But spraying with sulfates, which are allowed, there's categories of sulfates that are allowed in organic production in your vineyard, is actually more environmentally harmful than the synthetic chemicals that are sold by the agrochemical industry. So it's not as simple as just saying that organic is more green and non-organic is less green. It's actually quite complicated, and that's why we go and talk to winemakers. We listen to what they've got to say. We've also got to realize that particularly if you think about somewhere like Bordeaux, certainly somewhere like the UK with UK wine production, the climate, remember climate and weather are different things. Climate is the long-term trend, weather is what the weather is outside today. The climate in a place like Bordeaux, or Hampshire or Sussex or whatever, is too variable and too wet, that promotes too much rot and mold and disease, what people call disease pressure. Some places like New Zealand, Chile would be great examples of places I've been to. Sicily would be another great example, where the disease pressure is very low. The insects, the dryness, the warmth means that you don't have to do a lot in the vineyard. But famous wine growing regions like Bordeaux and Burgundy, they're just too damp there. Well, particularly Bordeaux. Burgundy is a slightly different picture. There's mists and things like that in Burgundy that promote rot. So the reasons for people spraying things are not all that they're evil. They're certainly in the last century, there were a lot of winemaking was about productivity. Now it's more about quality. So you've really got to listen to people. The other reason why a lot of winemakers don't certify as organic is that it's very expensive. You have to join a trade soil association, become certified. And this can be very expensive. In countries like Australia, it's not been part of their way of working, certainly in Italy, not part of their way of working. In Australia, when I asked a couple of winemakers who are essentially organic, they said to me they actually would have to get separate certification for different regions of the world. And on very small production of wine, remember we're talking about artisan wines here, you would then end up in just spending so much on certification to go across a few hundred bottles of wine. So the approach that we take in Honest Grapes is to audit and listen to what winemakers are saying and follow what they're doing. I am very sensitive, although I'm a physicist, not an organic chemist. I really do look at what chemicals people throw into wine and why they're using it. Thank you, Luke, for answering the question about when to drink the Elephas. Yes, it's the Van der Swaf. You can keep it. I keep it a couple of years, but no more than that. It's for early drinking. So picking up on those other buzzwords, something else to look out for is a recently introduced term in France. So there's an older term called le raisonné, which literally means the reasoned flight, which, to be honest, is as much a marketing buzz or excuse as anything else. Le raisonné is where saying we're not organic, but we don't put a lot of stuff in the vineyard. You know, with nice pictures of horses ploughing fields in Burgundy and things like that. Turn your back outside of tourist season and there's a tractor belching out diesel fumes, okay? But le raisonné, the reasoned flight, it's a way of saying we don't tip too much into our vineyard. But there's a more formal certification that's come out in France recently, which I'm very much in favor of, which is HVE. Now, something about France, 3% of the agricultural land is vineyards in France. 20% of the pesticide use in France is on those vineyards. So that just shows you the difference between reality and marketing buzz in terms of how difficult it is to grow grapes and get them to be suitable to turn into that lovely wine that we're drinking this evening. Well, actually, we're not having French wines, but you get my drift. The HVE, or I've called it high environmental value approach, is to say, can we reduce our inputs in terms of pesticides and other chemical inputs by at least 50% from where they were historically? Can we follow these le raisonné principles, and then we'll achieve a certification called high environmental value? I think that that's a healthy approach, particularly in those areas where people have too much disease pressure from the damp around them. I found this, by the way, when I went to Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay 8 years ago, sorry. Uruguay was the exception, where it has a maritime, almost Bordeaux-like climate. And it was very hard there for people to actually grow grapes in a fully organic way. The disease pressure was just too high.
When we move on to the third wine, which is, please get pouring it and tasting any minute now, there's almost an element of that to the Jumilla region, or at least the Jumilla part of the region, with the geology and the general geography as well, which we'll move on to eventually. But it's one of those environments that makes sustainable and organic viticulture a little bit easier. But we'll move on to that in just a second.
So I'm trying to cover my buzzwords. So we did cover, somebody asked about low and no sulfites last time, but I'll repeat it briefly for people who weren't there at the last session. I've just had some wines delivered to me from Beaujolais and Burgundy, and here's something we're looking at for an offer in March, April. Mr. No sulfite. So sulfite is the thing that you use to clean and prevent infection. Grape skins have sulfites on them, so zero sulfite is very hard to achieve. if you even wanted it. I'd certainly be in favor of a low sulfite regime. My closest friends, and as usual, I've got my background of Clemens Busch from the Mosel behind me, one of the first proponents of organic and biodynamic winemaking in Germany. When I ask him, do you use any sulfites? He says, look, I use a pinch just before I bottle. It keeps the wine stable, so I know people are safe to drink it in a few years' time. So important to cover that. Biodynamics. I'm sorry, this is the most academic of our 4 sessions. Biodynamics. So biodynamic wines are wines, for me as a scientist, this is like the difference between astronomy and astrology. Okay, astronomy is a science, astrology is something you read in the papers. And people say, what star sign are you? I do not believe in astrology, and I do not believe in a quasi-religion of biodynamism. But I do believe that well-made biodynamic wines show that people care about their land. Biodynamic wines are wines made employing the pseudo-scientific biodynamic methods to grow the fruit and during the post-harvest processing. Almost all biodynamic wines are also organic. There are a couple of exceptions, but they use compost as fertilizers. They avoid most pesticides, and they only use soil supplements that are prepared according to a guy called Rudolf Steiner's formulas. And I think it was 1929. I think it was around that time when Rudolf Steiner came up with 1924, he gave a course called Agriculture Course, which had ecological principles, which were spiritual and mystical. They were about harvesting the waxing and waning of the moon, and when you should plant crops, when you should harvest them, when you should feed them, when you should prune. Now, how can I argue for and against it and get off the fence here? Actually, it's quite easy. I like good wine, not bad wine. If a wine is biodynamic and it's horrible, then I'm not going to drink it. I won't say who, actually, but it's quite a well-known wine bar, currently, unfortunately, closed because of the current situation. There's quite a famous wine bar that specializes in biodynamic wines. And I sat there drinking something, a muddy French wine. And I said to the sommelier, if it looks like horse dung, I would use another 4-letter word, okay? If it looks like horse dung, if it's cloudy like horse dung, if it smells like horse dung, and if it tastes like horse dung, the horse probably dung in it, okay? I do not want my wine to taste like that. You know, it's just not me. I want wines that have got beauty and elegance to them, not wines that by pursuing some romance of nature then taste horrible. I just don't want to drink them. I want wines like these 3 this evening that are enjoyable and fun to drink. So how can I say biodynamics are good? Well, I have spent seasons with biodynamic winemakers, mostly in Germany, but also New Zealand, watching what they do. The love, the care, the attention that they spend, for me, overcomes their somewhat mystical attraction to goat's horns planted with sheep's milk and planting on the waxing and the waning of the moon and things like that. It's the care they put into it. Now, can I justify that? Yeah, well, romantically, yes. There have actually, though, been some blind tastings where biodynamic wines have been 9 out of 10 wines compared with their non-biodynamic counterparts. So I think it's fair to say, if we select a biodynamic wine on our wine list, it's done not because we are pretending to be part of some biodynamic wine movement or some hip thing. We're doing it because it was a wine that was good, passed our environmental selection process, but we thought was a great wine and good value for money. On a similar basis, moving on to the next buzzword of natural wines and low intervention wines, all sorts of buzzwords today. Low intervention wine means roughly what it says on the tin, which is I'm not going to spend too much time processing my wine in the winery. I'm going to let it go from grape juice must into wine without adding or taking away a lot. People like the amazing Jane Eyre are good practitioners of low intervention winemaking. where she is a micronegociant. Some of her grapes are organic and biodynamic, some aren't, but her winemaking, both in Australia and in Burgundy, is very, very much low intervention, very much the sort of culture she comes from. I respect that a lot. Natural winemaking is a more extreme version of low intervention winemaking, which is doing nothing to the wine. So you bring it into the winery, you press the grapes, you turn it into wine, and then good luck to you when you open it. Does it taste good? Now, we actually do sell a few natural wines, and we have two mixed cases called Natural Born Thrillers and Born to be Wild, which are on the cleaner and less funky side of natural wines for you to taste. But we're not big believers in following some hippie trend. By the way, I'm not against hippies. I'm not against sandals, and I'm not against beards, and I'm not against cardigans. Okay, but ultimately, I and Tom and Luke and Angus are about good wine at a good value price. You know, we're not just about following a religion. So it's got to be good enough, not just having a label on it. So I know there are other people who specialize in all our wines are all natural, all our wines are all organic. More than 40% of our wines are organic. More than 90% are sustainable. For me, it's still got to be good wine.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? And you kind of hit the nail on the head. I don't know if anyone's ever had a particularly dodgy natural wine or any dodgy wine, actually.
I've had lots. I've been so many wine fairs for natural raw wine. Okay, all these faddy things. You can drink a sip or a glass, but I'm only interested in it when I can drink a bottle. Personally,
I agree. I think
a good measure. Yeah, yeah, that's right. All three on the basis of this evening. Yeah, hopefully.
I'll move on to the last wine. I'm noting the time, and I will come to vegetarian, vegan, kosher, and questions and anything else. I see a couple of people have sent me direct messages, and I can either answer them open. I'm happy to answer them openly, or I'll keep them until I've done the last wine. Let us do that. So I've covered most of my buzzwords, but I'll cover a couple of the more. So vegetarian, vegan, and kosher I'll cover later, in the interest of time. And here we are with our final wine. Would you like to talk about it while I have a sip?
Yeah. So we are Estancia del Silencio is the name of the wine, and so the Jumilla and put Monastrell up there. I think that's on the front of the label, isn't it? So that's the grape variety. Jumilla is the sub-region. So we're in Murcia as the overall region of the. I'm sure you all know where Spain is, so I've put this whole map of Spain and the whole of the Iberian Peninsula there. The reason I've done that is so you can put Murcia into context with Spain. Also, you can see, as with the Sicilian wine being close to North Africa, I mean we're pretty close to Algiers here, and not too far latitudinally to North Africa as well. The other picture you can see some old bush vines, untrained. They're not kind of on the regimented training system that suits other types of vines. Quite stony, loose soils there. You can see we're in a hilly area, but also about 500 to 600 meters up above sea level. So there's definitely some altitude. Almost all of the vineyards are Jumilla. And then obviously an image of the grapes there, but you can see the dark purple, the one in the center. So you've got three dark purple little bits on the map of southeastern Spain. So we're just inland from the town of Alicante, and then just to the north of that is Valencia as well. But that just gives you a bit of a lay of the land. Again, obviously organic, this one, and there in this part of the world, there's lots of really, really old bush vines. So again, not trained. They're essentially growing out of the ground from a distance to look like could be a bush of any other kind. Doesn't necessarily look like a regimented vineyard, just a series of smaller kind of vines that are growing out where it's a bit more difficult to pick. You have to do it all by hand, all of that kind of thing. And there's some volcanic soils here. There's sandy soils which make up the bedrock, and that I'm sure Nathan will probably go into it again in a second. certain types of geology make organic viticulture much easier. And even though it's dry and warm here as well, if not hot, with the altitude playing a bit of a factor in cooling it down, there's no irrigation for these vineyards, which is quite surprising, because it's really dry, but no irrigation. We touched on it last week. The roots have to grow really, really far down into the ground to find some kind of water during the growing season when there's been no rain for a while. And that tends to mean better wine, deeper roots, better wine. They take more from the ground that's below them. Not necessarily direct impact on taste, but just healthier vines. And under a little bit of stress, not too much, tends to make more interesting wines as well. So we'll move on to the tasting, well, the smelling and assessment of tasting.
Yeah, Luke, just to add on that quickly, I don't know whether you mentioned it, I may have missed it, but so Monastrell is known as Monastrell in Spain, but it's actually in France, it's Mourvedre, and in Australia, it's Mataro, if you ever heard those grape varieties before. And upon tasting this, we've got here tonight, usually you saw in the picture of the grapes, they're quite thick-skinned grapes themselves, which usually produce quite a lot of tannin, but here the tannins are pretty non-existent, and that's purely because obviously they want to make this wine relatively easy to drink, and they do that probably they do that in the winery through probably a cold soak and like less pumping over, so less contact with the skins, so there's less tannin in general, which makes it a lot smoother, less pigeage and stuff like that. So
good point. I don't know if I mentioned definitely. So Monastrell is the grape variety as known in Spain. Mourvedre in France often makes up part of the blend, but you do get some that are 100% varietal Mourvedre, and usually really, really big and tannic and deep and dark as well. And then occasionally, you see it in New World countries as Mataro, particularly in Australia, it's called Mataro. And makes a whole range of wines. It shows you something quite drinkable. It doesn't have to have loads of age or anything, and it doesn't have to be super tannic. It can be a little bit more on the softer, easy drinking side.
Isn't this a fantastic, attractive wine? Jumilla is famous for its monastrels, as Angus said, Mataro, if you were from Australia, or Mourvedre from France. It's so much soft spice, so floral, loads of blackberries, raspberries, so fruity. I call it my perfect pizza wine. It's so good with Spanish tapas, dried tomatoes, all of those lovely sort of meaty tapas things. It's perfect with pizza. I just think it's such an overlooked wine. And at the price point, sort of £11 or something like that, we even do a 3-litre bag in box if you're really into it. It's just a tremendous wine. And to get, here we are holding it up there. There's half the bottle through there, Yvonne. It really is the most attractive wine. And if you're going to have a takeaway or something after this, all of your sort of tapas, ideal with all of those sort of meatballs and things like that, just perfect. It's one of those just overlooked things. And this one really belies itself. It's an absolute stunner. Yvonne's asked why aren't there more Portuguese wines? That's going to be a feeder to Luke and Angus to talk about our next club evening.
Okay,
we have lots of lovely Portuguese wines.
For that one. Yeah, absolutely. So Luke, I'll let you take away as you post.
Sure. The simple answer is that there are lots of lovely Portuguese wines. Reason that we don't see that many of them in the UK, although there's a couple of exceptions now, is there's a number of reasons. There's a lot of native grapes that are really difficult to say and spell, which doesn't necessarily help. But they've got a long history of quality winemaking, but it's really upped its game, I think, in the last couple of decades. Vino Verde is something that you see now on a lot of pub menus, a lot of restaurant menus as well, becoming kind of like maybe the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc of today, at least in summer days. It's got a really light sort of citrusy, very enjoyable, easy drinking quality to it. So if you're going to see anything other than port wines, obviously, then it might be a Vino Verde, but it might be a Touriga Nacional, or possibly something from the Dow region as well. They're making their way in, but they're still a little bit esoteric, but often really good value. If you're looking for something on the cheaper, easier drinking side of a pub wine list, I'd definitely stick my neck out and go for something Portuguese. But at Honest Grapes, we have a limited number because we keep the list nice and succinct and small. I'm actually showing a good few of them at our next Premier Crew Club evening, which is, I think off the top of my head, it's 24th of February. I mean, in a few weeks. And we're doing it in the 50 milliliter vials. So you get 6 different wines. 2 of them are fortified, so we've got a port and a Madeira at the end. But then there's a dry white, a dry red. Well, they're all dry. So we've got a white, a rosé, and 2 reds, and then 2 fortifieds at the end. So yeah, come along to that because it should be a really, really good window into Portuguese wines in general. We've got our good friend and Portuguese wine expert and importer Raymond Reynolds joining us as well. So he can definitely answer any question that you have. Certainly anything that me and Angus can't answer. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you there for a tasting version of that answer. But I don't know if Angus has got anything else to answer. The short answer is that there are lots of good Portuguese wines, and it's a whole kind of world to explore unto itself. Yeah.
Yes. So here you are. I'm on the events page on our website. We have an amazing set of growers over the next few weeks. So we have session 4 of Taste Lab Live next week, which is going to be all about big reds from the New World, basically. So it's a good see out winter in style with some big reds. We've got 3 sessions with 3 very, very well-known Burgundian winemakers. The total package is a couple of £100, but you're having 18 different wine samples there. These ones are supplied in 50 milliliter little mini bottles, basically. The wonderful Australian Burgundian Jane Eyre on the 16th of February. On the 18th of February, Romain Topinot, very well-known organic biodynamic producer from Burgundy, whose wines, all of these people I have extensive in my personal wine collection from Morin Saint-Denis in the Côte de Nuits of Burgundy. And then on the 23rd of February, the illustrious Etienne de Monti and his famous Canadian winemaker, Brian Sieve, again, organic and biodynamic winemaker from, in fact, former banker, but his father, Hubert de Monti, founded the winery, I think, and that is on the 23rd. So you can buy those individually or as a complete pack, but for those you get 6 different wines. Some of those wines are sort of well over £100 a bottle, so great chance to taste some illustrious wines. And as Luke has said, here is the Portuguese tasting, which is our club evening. If you're already a Premier Crew member, it's £50. If you're not, it's £65, or join up, basically, to the club.
Instantly say £15. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Straight away. So we're just running over time. So I want to talk about vegetarian and vegan wine. So can I have a few minutes permission for people to talk about that? But if you're running off, or if Uber Eats or Just Eat or Deliveroo is ringing on the doorbell to deliver your greasy kebab, which has been delivered from half a mile away but is inexplicably cold, then please feel free to. Oh, I see Dawn has already done that, has gone on, probably gone to answer the doorbell and pick up the KFC or whatever. Anyway, no advertisement intended. Let me talk about, well, I'm doing it. So no, I'm not actually. We've got lovely Chinese food this evening. So let's talk about vegetarian and vegan. So we're now in vegetarian. Why would grape juice, fermented grape juice, be anything other than vegan? Well, it's quite simple. Firstly, there were a load of things you could have added in the vineyard or in the winery that were not vegetarian or vegan. So there's a set of additives or chemicals that aren't permitted. But really importantly, at the end of the winemaking process, there are 2 things that people do called filtration and fining. Filtration, exactly as it sounds, passing the wine. Yvonne, I can see the watermark on that bottle is going down and down. The filtration process, when you go to a supermarket and you want your brilliant clear wine, even us, most of our wines are brilliant and clear rather than cloudy. That's because either it's been carefully treated and the remaining dead yeast cells and bits of grape skin and stuff have been allowed to settle to the bottom of the tank, and then what's called racked out, done very carefully, or it's squeezed through a filter you know, like a drain pipe sort of thing, like your drain in your sink, to filter out the little bits and pieces. And technically, there are lots of different sizes of filter, and the size of filter filters out different bits. So the fining, so that's the filtration. Fining is also about removing unwanted material, and it's part of clarifying the wine and stabilizing it. Remember that if the wine has got to last for years in the bottle, then you want it to be stable. It's like, wine is not the same as beer, but it is a living product. It's not inert like whiskey or Madeira. You want to take out the molecules that have tannins, phenolics, polysaccharides, unwanted particles that are left over from the dead yeast cells and the bits of grapes. But most of our winemakers prefer not to fine their wines because it sort of takes out the goodness. What in French we call the matière, the material. Texture, when I keep talking about texture in organic wines, that's what I'm talking about, the goodness in the wine. If you filter it all out, you get something that may be clear and brilliant, but misses something in its bite and its texture and its interest. So most natural wine producers, most sustainable producers, don't fine or filter their wines. They find other ways of doing it. The fining agents traditionally include gelatin, pig's trotters, isinglass, which is from fish bladders, egg whites, casein, which is milk protein. Well, I've already said 4 materials, the first 2 of which would stop a wine from being vegetarian, and the last 2 of which stop it being vegan. But if I then move on, there are inert materials, bentonite, which is a clay material, and carbon filtration, which are inert materials. And for a wine to be vegan, it would either not be fined using those non-permitted materials, or it would be fined purely using a clay-based or carbon-based material. I can get into real geeky stuff if you want to, but we're sort of getting towards dinner time, so I'll get that far. I'll get that far in my geeking out. Bentonite is formed from volcanic ash usually. Egg whites have been more often used in red wines because you then don't see the slight bit of residue that's left over from the egg white. So that's why wines can be not vegetarian or not vegan. We also use the word vegan friendly to say a wine is ostensibly vegan and any traces of any other material would be so little that they'd be acceptable to the vegan society. Lastly then, kosher wine. I'm often asked this because we have club wines that are kosher. What's the difference between kosher wine and not kosher wine when grapes are just a fruit that you can have on the table and there's nothing non-kosher about grapes? Well, in the Jewish religion, just as in Christianity, if you go to communion, you would have red wine and crackers or wafers. And similarly in Judaism, wine and bread are sacramental, or they are foods which have a religious significance. And the wines that we make, we have our own kosher production and we sell some kosher wines. Those wines, between the time when the skin of the grapes are broken, so on the sorting table when it comes into the winery, and the time when the wine is bottled, they're only handled by Orthodox Jews, with the winemaking of the winemaker being accompanied by a team of Orthodox Jews who we have. So we have kosher production, our own kosher production in Bordeaux and Burgundy, and our famous club wine, Ponte Labri in Bordeaux, we make about 1/3 of it is made kosher as well. So there's something there. So we've gone a bit over time. I told you that this 3rd session of Taste Lab Live has been the most academic, the most geeky session. I hope the wines have been good. Hope you've enjoyed the wines as well. Can I have a vote for the wine of the evening? Thank you, Val. Vote for the wine of the evening. Who's going to vote for the Grillo? The white?
Fans, excellent, okay.
Yeah. Who's going to vote for the Elephas, the middle wine? That was stunning. And my favorite pizza and tapas wine, the Estancia del Silencio, Jumilla.
Everyone's still listening. That's excellent. I'm pleased.
Yeah, thank you. I put that little threesome together to show you that wine that's made sustainably, wine that's made ethically, wine that's made in places that look like vineyards and family wineries, rather than places that look like oil refineries. These can still be brilliant. These can still be great value wines. So thank you. I'm still going to stay online, but I'd like to give you permission, of course, to log off now and go to dinner and answer some of the other questions people asked, and just, you know, come off mute and have a chat. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now, I think.